Hey guys, this is a segment from the Slumpbuster Podcast. You can find the full episode on any of the various podcast platforms, or of course, subscribe to us on YouTube for more of our content. Other than that, guys, sit down, bust a slump, and enjoy. The future of the sport is something that Dre and I have always been talking about on this show, because during COVID, and you got to commend David and White, what he was able to do to be able to put on shows when no one else wanted to put on shows. And I think it really added to the sports popularity in North America, whereas there's always been this core four of the NFL, the NBA, MLB, and the NHL. Now UFC, now MMA is starting to enter that mix, enter that conversation in ways that it hadn't previously. It was always stalled by other combat sports like boxing. Now boxing, unfortunately, unless you're a big fan of the Paul brothers, is kind of on its way out. When you think of the UFC, when you think of MMA as a whole, what are your thoughts? Where do you think the sport is going? And do you think it could break into that top four in North America?
Something interesting I've noticed a lot recently as far as COVID goes, certain industries have had a lot of boom because these upstart companies are like UFC that has been vying for that place in the number 4 spot as you're talking about for some time, trying to get on the main stage of regular American or worldwide sports. COVID happening, shutting down so many specific niche industries and in general industries, them pursuing and continuing to have fights and following the regulations to a T was crucial for them to start pushing themselves into that spot. Because now it's like, okay, butts are in seats, but nothing's going on. Here's a UFC fight. They're still doing stuff. People who may never have thought about watching a combat sport think, oh, these guys doing it, and I don't know, football or soccer, whatever I would normally be watching is currently off. Let's do it. Let's have a good night and see what happens. They love it. They pay for the subscription. They got another fan. And you can imagine that on the thousands, if not millions kind of scale. And so I absolutely see them not only breaking into that spot, but taking the number 1 place. And that's kind of bold. That's kind of a bold statement. You still have baseball, basketball, football that have been tough, enduring sports for decades. People absolutely love diehard fans, would go to war over their favorite teams. But you see that on a degree with the UFC fighters. Ireland, great example. Those guys go nuts when they see Conor step on the mat, and they would go to war for that man. And even when he had the incidents where him and Khabib were kind of building to the fight, and there's conflict on both sides consistently, you can see the Twitter feeds, the Facebook posts, people just going at each other during that whole kerfuffle. And so that's what I believe UFC is headed towards: a main stage, huge fan base, much bigger than what they have now, and the same kind of dedication that we see to current sports teams, to individual fighters, and maybe even their camps or gyms.
Yeah, Jared, I think you're exactly right. Is the UFC and MMA in general has the opportunity to grow so large, especially because it's so easy to input some of those local heroes from different countries or different states and cities. And so, like you said, Conor McGregor in Ireland, or Zhang Wei Li in China. And it's very easy just to pick up if you're the UFC and say, hey, we're going to host an event. Even if there's COVID, we can host it in Ireland and have, everybody cheering around the stadium, or whatever it may be. So I agree. I do think the UFC is poised to continue to grow. And Dana, as much as I don't necessarily like the guy, he's doing a fantastic job. So what can you complain about? My next question for you, sort of related, is what about ONE FC? So I know, or I guess I should say ONE FC, Bellator, all the other competing brands. So ONE is going to have a bunch of shows here on TNT coming up in April. Do you think that there can ever be a true challenger to the UFC, or do you think the UFC is sort of just the top dog, never be toppled?
UFC, having started when they did, breaking into an inch, they are the almost literal started from the bottom, now we're here story, because they had tons of scrutiny. Numerous states would never let them host an event, and some state official would actually verbally say that, say, I will never put a UFC show on because it's violent, people don't want to see it, or whatever reason they gave at the time. And look at them now. They've gone through so much to achieve this spot. Can someone ever compete with them? Yes. I think Bellator is slowly slipping away from that, but you got events like ONE FC that you were talking about, who recently signed fighters like Demetrius Johnson, Eddie Alvarez, my personal favorite, Jeff Chan, if anyone knows about him from MMA Shredded. So they're getting some really good guys, really showmanship style guys who can put on a good show while still taking the victories and keep people involved. But now's the time to do it. COVID, as horrible as it's been, is the time to boost your business above your competitors. because you can look at what they're doing, how they're struggling, or how this might be affecting them, and look for ways for you to work around that. And then being based outside the United States, and now UFC hosting events outside the United States, they're able to put on more shows because they're able to follow regulations. Their COVID cases are probably not as severe, and there's more opportunity for them to grow there. I just don't think no one's going to be able to compete with the UFC in the meantime. Maybe now is a good occasion for people to catch up if they jump on it now, get somewhere near. But UFC is too big. Too many people are still trying to fight for that place on the roster. Too many people are looking for that perfect matchup one day. Some kids starting out right now may think, oh God, one day I get to fight with Conor McGregor. He's in the UFC. I got to get there so I can do it too. So for right now, I don't think anyone's going to meet them, but this is certainly the time for them to try. No one should be slacking on their game during this time.